Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time I wanted to concentrate on how to transform your, let's say, on-premises customizations to SharePoint Online. So kind of a different aspects and different things to consider when you're planning to move your on-premises deployment, including some of the customizations to the SharePoint Online. My name is Esa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today, say one of the well-known specialists on this area as well, is Erwin van der Vunen. Erwin, will you do the intro?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Esa. Erwin van Vunen, I'm the Product Owner for Transformation at Rancor. We build, among others, tools to help you to transform from on-premises to the cloud.
Absolutely. And obviously, because we're not well, we want to keep this as a technical discussion. We're not going to really demo what Erwin is doing on live, but Rancor has great products on this segment as well, which you might want to check out in the future as well. Now, so Erwin is a product owner on transformation. Personally, I've done, before moving into the SharePoint engineering, I worked 2 years full-time on transforming, how would I put it, tens and tens of large customers from farm solutions to the SharePoint Online. So I think we have quite a lot of knowledge on this topic to go through and have a discussion. Just a word of a warning, we're not going to do any actual demos. The reason for that one is that we want to keep these webcasts relatively short, not like 2 hours and so on. So we're kind of talking about the key points to consider, key transformation aspects and the process itself, rather than deep diving on individual challenges and patterns as well. All of that is documented in MSDN in a pretty okay format. Now, before we actually go to the actual discussion, one key point to understand, when you're moving to the SharePoint Online, it does not actually mean that there cannot be customizations. And this seems to be something based on the feedback of getting every now and then, that people are slightly confused. Yes, you can have customizations, and those customizations typically can achieve up to 100% of the functional requirements. The thing is, though, that you need to implement those customizations slightly differently. So you cannot use farm solutions as such, which would contain, let's say, feature XMLs, which are deployed to the file system and all of that. But from a functional and end user perspective, you can absolutely still have the needed customizations. The way they're being implemented is slightly different.
Right, yeah. So what I hear is, or what I usually say to people is that it's actually a different mindset. It's the same, you can do the same. In the end, for the end user perspective, it's almost 100% the same functionality, but the way you implemented it is completely different. And what I hear a lot, for instance, is like people, yeah, but I need elevated privileges. I need to be able to like step up in my privileges and do something because the end user is not allowed to do that. But then I write elevated code and it starts to do something for that user. And I can't do that in SharePoint Online. And as a result, I can't move my solution to the cloud. And I've been working now with the client technology in SharePoint Online for quite some years, and I've never run into that specific issue. It's just a different way of approaching the problem and taking it from there and building a solution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And coming back on our example, elevation is a really good example. You can actually elevate that, but you need to implement that in a slightly different way.
Exactly.
So, and exactly. It's absolutely possible. You can't take your existing, let's say, farm solution code and just plug it in to run it in SharePoint Online. And that's never going to happen. We can't make that happen in SharePoint Online because the farm solutions are running in the context of the farm. And in a single farm in SharePoint Online, you can have thousands of tenants. So we would compromise the other tenants when somebody is deploying a code which is not acting properly. But you can achieve, for example, elevation by calling a web API in Azure, and then that's going to call back using elevated privileges. So there are multiple patterns how to make these things happen.
Yep.
Good. So before we actually move into the process discussion and let's say the key recommendations, there's massive amount of those available, but we wanted to raise a few of them within the webcast. Let's actually talk about the different SharePoint development options. You might have seen this slide in the past. We did a webcast with Waldeck Mastercards a while back, but we wanted to kind of concentrate on this discussion from a perspective of transformation. Now, SharePoint development options. So classic SharePoint development option was WSPs, farm solutions, or sandbox solutions as well. Sandbox solutions were highly limited. Sandbox solution code behind is no longer supported in SharePoint Online. And even though technically you can run declarative sandbox solutions in SharePoint Online, it's definitely not the preferred option, because that actually adds complexity. There's no APIs to activate those sandbox solutions inside collection and all of that. And even though there would be, there's additional implications of sandbox solutions and feature XMLs being present on the sites, which would harm you in the future. So not definitely the best option for SharePoint Online. And farm solutions obviously not supported in Office 365 either.
I actually like to say that it's actually a good thing that coded sandbox solutions are gone. There's one way to recognize if a developer was building a sandbox solution, and it is by the fact that he was banging his head on the table constantly.
Yes, indeed.
That was a clear sign. There were so many limitations and things you ran into and issues you ran into because you were used to do something and then in sandbox you couldn't, and that was so frustrating. So I think it's a good thing.
It is. And part of this transition, when we took away the code behind sandbox solutions support in SharePoint Online, we actually further enhanced our remote APIs. So we did work together with our ISVs and going through and making sure that whatever sandbox solutions they were using, they can achieve exactly the same thing using remote APIs, using REST APIs or CSAM APIs. Now, that's farm solution, not in Office 365 or in SharePoint Online, and never will be. That's out of question. The second option is the add-in model. So add-in model was introduced in SharePoint 2013, absolutely still supported, and we'll keep on investing on this one. There are scenarios where add-in model is the right choice in the future as well, especially if you want to have that security isolation for the customizations, because the add-in model is taking advantage of when it's executing anything within the context of adding. There was, however, a small kind of, or how would I put it, a big limitation on the add-in model, which is quite typical discussion around the add-in model, is that the web part experience, not good. The web part experience was that the functionality is in an iframe, which doesn't scale, it doesn't scale in a responsive way, and all of that. So people were not really super happy on that one from an end-user perspective.
You could almost say, and I because I don't work for Microsoft, I can maybe make that statement that the add-in model, especially the web part experience, is like the new sandbox.
Kind of.
It's pretty frustrating to build with, and the limitations of the iframe are very frustrating, I would say.
True, absolutely. Now, the third option, which doesn't actually get mentioned that often, is an external app or external single-page application. And typically, these are being implemented, for example, in, let's say, Azure or Amazon, and there are applications which are then authenticating against SharePoint Online using Azure AD. And this would be completely decoupling customization from SharePoint, so you can't really expose them in the context of SharePoint. But you can actually build super cool looking UIs, which are then aggregating, for example, information from SharePoint side using the SharePoint REST APIs and CSAM APIs and all of that. Yep. The big challenge of this one, obviously, is that you are fully responsible of implementing the UIs. So the SharePoint is just a data layer in that case. But you have, you have a lot of flexibility outside of SharePoint.
An example there is it is getting better and better now with SharePoint being supporting mobile devices. But way back when SharePoint Online wasn't that mobile enabled, if you want to call it like that, a good example of this was just that I've seen implementations where they built a full mobile intranet as an external app. So the whole UI experience was running external, and that app was communicating using the client-side object model, etc., with SharePoint to expose the content from SharePoint to mobile devices. But the whole interface was running outside of SharePoint, fully outside of SharePoint.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the latest fellow, which is available within your tool belt against the SharePoint Online, is the SharePoint Framework. We went GA with SharePoint Framework client-side web parts on mid-February. And now we're recording this in June 2017. We're pretty close of going live with a dev preview for SharePoint Framework extensions. So depending on when you're watching the video, those extensions are already in dev preview or even in GA after the dev preview period. But the SharePoint Framework gives you the flexibility of embedding your JavaScript on a SharePoint Online in a reliable way, so to say. It provides administrative control so that the tenant administrator can control who's putting what customizations on the sign, and you can adjust that control based on a requirement. It has a flexible web part model, which is clearly addressed, and that was targeted to address the let's say, the feedback around add-ins, because add-ins, the web part is running in an iframe. With SharePoint Framework, it is not. The web part is actually running in the context of the page. But then that has obvious implications, which are impacting the security model. So you need to understand what is that web part, what does it actually do when you're putting that on a page, and that's really the key reason why it's tenant administrative operation to get those running.
In my opinion, with the SharePoint Framework, the whole security model is greatly simplified. It's much easier to grasp what is going on and what it's supposed to do, instead of when the add-ins, where the add-in has its own security needed rights to do something on a document library, etc. Yep. That it has the user that has a certain access to it, etc., etc. So there were so many layers with add-ins that you have to keep track of.
True.
And they still make sense in certain contexts, but with the SharePoint Framework, it has been greatly simplified. It's if the web part or the extension always runs under the permission of the current user. Can the user do something? Then the web part can do something.
True, absolutely. Super straightforward, super understandable, and other products and services are doing pretty much the same model as well. So it's kind of easily understand what are we doing here. And the SharePoint Framework is being built using the industry standard development model. So using WebStack and using the whatever JavaScript framework you want to use and all of that. So it is no doubt the most advanced model as well. One thing to notice on SharePoint Framework, though, it's a UI framework, at least right now. So whenever you need to actually do something long-running operations, for example, then you need to call let's say a custom web API or Azure function from your SharePoint Framework web part to start the process, and then that's going to do the long-running operations. So from that perspective, you're always combining some additional technologies, or might be combining some additional technologies as well, not just SharePoint Framework.
I think it's also fair to bring up the fact that because the SharePoint Framework is based on industry standards, they are typical standards that have not been used in SharePoint before. So if you're a traditional SharePoint developer, you might be a bit surprised, because the whole flow of developing applications is very different from what you've been used to with Visual Studio and C# code, etc. The SharePoint Framework is all JavaScript and has all kinds of other tools connected to it that you need to use to build and deploy the solutions. So it's a bit of a different world, but a very interesting world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even if you come from a farm solution, let's say server-side code development perspective, there's still skills needed, or let's say tasks which require the C# development, because that's the backend. And that's the web APIs and whatever is running in Azure or let's say Amazon. It doesn't really matter where the code is running. There, people are still writing server-side code. So we're not switching completely to JavaScript. No, that's not what this means. The UI layer is completely JavaScript, so it's fluent, fast, efficient, but then all of the long-running operations, integrations, and all of that, they are still being done using a server-side code. You can use JavaScript using Node.js there as well, but if you're more familiar with C# or VB.NET, that's absolutely doable as well.
Yep.
Now, just making sure that people are super aware, all of these options are absolutely fully supported, except the farm solutions not supported in SharePoint Online. And quite often, you will combine multiple of those when you're actually fulfilling the functional requirement. So you could use SharePoint Framework for the UI elements, but then you might be using provider-hosted add-in together with your custom web API to then call back on a SharePoint in an elevated permissions way and all of that. So there's multiple scenarios where we're combining multiple options.
Every technology has their usage model and has their strengths, and that's where you should use them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Number one thing is to understand the differences, what it means, what's possible, and then you can use the right tool from your tool belt to the right purpose. And that's kind of it's preaching us to the let's say the more and more to the transformation discussion. So, like mentioned when we started the webcast, I've personally done, let's say, 30 to 50 transformation projects for large customers. Some of them have had hundreds of thousands of accounts, and making them sure that they can transition from on-premises to the SharePoint Online. And one of the things what we came up with as part of that process is kind of a validated process which will help people to do and to be successful on the transformation. And this is a 5-step process which absolutely needs to start with readiness. So there has to be readiness for SharePoint framework and adding model topics. You need to understand the hosting decisions. What does it actually mean that I'm actually doing something or hosting SharePoint framework? Because even with SharePoint framework, not just the adding model, you are hosting a JavaScript file somewhere. And that has an implication. It has a reason or implicate technical actions behind those decisions. And in the readiness box, the most important thing, what I would say, is the development model readiness. So essentially, we should not approach the transformation without understanding what is an adding model, where I can use that, or what is a SharePoint framework model, and where I can actually use that. So what are the limitations, and where it's suitable, and how does it actually work? Then when we have that knowledge, the number one thing is assessment. Oh, the second thing is assessment. And this is where you essentially have a look on what do we actually have right now within our farm, within our on-premises farm. So what are the customizations which have been deployed, but not just concentrating on the technology. Because quite often what we saw, based on our analysis and based on the projects, and I'm sure that Irving can sign this off as well, it's quite often that 75% of those customizations are no longer in use, or they're being used by a really subset of users. So really understanding the usage, which of the customizations are actually in use, and really concentrate on the business and functional requirements, not on the, hey, here's a content type, we need to transform a content type, here's a web part, we need to transform a web part. More concentrating on, okay, why does the web part exist? Is it used? How is it used? What does it actually achieve? And because that will give you then understanding on, guess what? We can actually implement that web part using out-of-the-box capabilities. Or we could implement, or this content type isn't actually useful anymore. We can use that or achieve the same model using an alternative route.
When it comes to assessment, I like to say that do not underestimate the complexity of your environment and of the functionality that is being used in the environment. I've been working for years with another product called Lotus Domino, and that product had a usage model that we call Popcorn Domino. And it basically meant that it was so easy to build customizations with it that things were popping up all the time, pop, 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 and totally out of control. And that you do see sometimes with SharePoint too. And especially when in a larger environment where you have delegated responsibilities throughout an organization, separate IT departments which have rights to do on the farm, it's very easy to just upload a simple solution file and create a functionality there. Sure. And also keep in mind that even if a solution is barely used, it could still be business critical.
Absolutely.
It could be 2 people running in the organization using that specific solution. If you just take it away and simply ignore it or whatever, maybe the whole organization is getting crippled because of that. Or so it's good to understand that you understand what are people doing, how are they using it. Very, very important. And what do you have out there?
Yes, and also one thing which could be a slightly difficult thing to analyze is also the external applications which are connected to the SharePoint. So
exactly.
going through the organization and understanding, okay, what kind of applications you might have which are connecting towards your on-premises SharePoint, because you need to do changes on them as well. The authentication model between on-premises SharePoint and SharePoint Online is different. So you can't rely on those applications to be able to connect to SharePoint Online without any modifications. So it's not just about the fund solutions. It's much more than that. So understanding and assessment, no doubt, number one thing. And like mentioned, concentrate on functionalities, not on the technology. Why is it there? What is it actually doing? And then when you have that, you understand what's available, what are the usage scenarios, how people are using these things, then we can actually do initial set of planning. And the reason why I'm saying initial is that this is the basic set of planning, how we can approach achieving those functional requirements. And after this, we can do accurate estimates, essentially, because now we know which of the existing customizations are important, which of them are in use, which of them have to be transformed, which of them we can actually just drop. Because quite often, unfortunately, back in the previous, let's say, years or even previous decade or within the 10 years, people have been implementing such a humongous amount of customizations, and many of them are not used, or B, they're used without actually giving any additional value. So that there's no real value on the customization. And I've seen so many of these, unfortunately, during the customer projects we've been doing in the past as well.
Also, when you start planning, you say this bullet solution can be converted to out-of-the-box capabilities.
Yes.
Keep in mind that if you're moving to SharePoint Online, you're moving to a running target. SharePoint Online is constantly improving and has, from a out-of-the-box capabilities concept, way more available than the on-prem environment of SharePoint.
True.
Well, it might not be available on-prem. It could very well be available already in SharePoint Online for you to utilize instead of building your own customization. Simple example is, for instance, Office 365 Planner, which is not available on-premise, etc. So there's a lot of functionality in the cloud already there for you, waiting for you to be consumed and to use compared to on-premise.
Absolutely. Really, really important thing. So whoever is actually your technical architect or doing the initial planning should be aware of all of these capabilities which are available. And like Irvin said, we do apologize from behalf of the Microsoft. I'm putting my service SharePoint engineering hat on, that we're actually releasing too fast new capabilities. So people are having a hard time to keep up because all the time new capabilities, all the time new enhancements and improvements as well. Now, like mentioned, this is the time when I can do accurate estimates. And really, the key reason for this one is that at this point, you have understanding of what are we actually trying to achieve with the existing customizations. There is no such thing as doing estimates based on the number of farm solutions, because guess what? A farm solution can be 5 kilobytes or it can be 50 megabytes. So the number of farm solution is not a factor, definitely not a thing to consider. It's really around what's being used, what are the end users using, what are the critical things, and what do we want to migrate to the other side. Because one aspect on this discussion is that when you're doing this transformation, this is an awesome opportunity to also to make sure that do we really want to invest on that customization if we can achieve 80% of that functionality from out-of-the-box capabilities or something like that. So thinking through that return of an investment for the customizations as well. Good. So the following stages are pretty normal in the let's say technical implementation project. So the next stage is obviously the implementation. So and which would include the detailed technical planning quite often, the actual implementation of the new solution, how to make those happen, and that's following up on the typical development process, including testing and all of that. And then the last stage is deployment. So getting those customizations when they have been tested, getting them available within a tenant, waiting for the content to be migrated on a SharePoint tenant, and then, well, there's multiple aspects and options on this one. So some customers, they've done transformation to the modern technologies, for example, the adding model first in on-premises, and then they moved into SharePoint Online. That's one option. But then if you do that, you need to think through existing content to be, in quotes, retrofitted. Essentially, how do I get rid of the farm solution from all of these site collections? How do I do that in place extraction of the farm solution capabilities and replace that with an adding model? And for that one, maybe the best approach is to think through the transformation to happen as part of the content migration, and not do it first in on-premises and then move it to SharePoint Online. Rather, think it in a way that in on-premises we had certain customizations. In SharePoint Online, we will have the needed customizations and configurations for the site collections, and we'll create the site collection ready. We'll create the content type, site columns, and all of that ready to be waiting in SharePoint Online, and then we use migration tooling to get the content moved from on-premises to the SharePoint Online. And this way, you can actually start with a small amount of site collections. You can, for example, agree that all of the new site collections, the new content is being created to the SharePoint Online. The old stuff is getting gradually migrated. So it's not a big bang transformation. It's rather phased, one step at a time migration as part of the people moving into the SharePoint Online. And more, let's say, internal selling note, what I've seen for a lot of the customers doing is that they don't even try to do or even try to migrate everything from on-premises to the SharePoint Online. They rather start by migrating on a subset of the site collections which are relevant and which are still being used, plus all of the new content is getting created to the SharePoint Online. Quite often what this means is that the site collection administrators in on-premises, they actually want to get access on the advantages in the SharePoint Online by themselves, and they might actually do the migration by themselves as well. So it doesn't have to be a massive multi-million-dollar projects where everything is being moved. It can happen gradually as well.
No. Another thing that is, I think, if you consider going for a hybrid environment where you keep on premises for some functionality, and then it actually makes sense to align your development process and the technologies you're using to keep them in sync with the ones online, so you don't have completely different ways of buildings. Like, oh, this is the online development style, and this is the on-premise development style.
Absolutely.
But if you move to using the same approach on-prem and cloud, it makes it in the future much easier if you decide to move an additional component from on-premises to the cloud by simply just redirecting your provisioning to the cloud instead of from on-prem.
True.
So
Absolutely.
It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And then the end user impact won't be that big either. So the UIs won't be changing. Well, they don't necessarily need to be changed, but still.
Yep.
Good. We would strongly recommend people to have a look on this process. We've proven this with multi-billion-dollar revenue customers and tens and tens of projects. So we do know that this process works. There's additional resources, even templates and all of that available through the SharePoint PnP initiative. Now, before we close up on the discussion, we wanted to kind of walk through, let's say, 8 key points around the transformation. And like I said when we started, we can't really deep dive on this webcast to individual technical. This is what you should be doing when you're doing X and Y and Z. We do have a lot of videos, a lot of guidance available on that one. But we wanted to kind of pinpoint 8 specific things and start with these 4 more conceptual discussions. So, number 1, dropping all unnecessary customizations. So think about the return of an investment. And this is actually really, really important thing, because why would you customize or introduce a customization if it doesn't bring you value? So, like I said, we've seen so many customizations being hanging in the on-premises farm, but not being used. So you should definitely not start by, analyzing WSP packages and, hey, we have 9 web parts. Okay, that means that we need to have 9 SharePoint Framework web parts. That's not the right thing to do. Think about what the functionalities are, reduce the number of customizations where possible, because that will reduce the costs, overall costs within the deployment as well.
For instance, another customization that what I see a lot that is like redundant workflows, if you want to call them like that. So people will have to initiate a workflow to approve something, but they usually say it's them approving it themselves, because
Yes.
that workflow was once designed to have people other than themselves approve it, but then that whole business flow is not in place anymore, but the technical workflow is still in place.
Sure.
So they still have to go through the whole approval process to get that thing approved, which is just very annoying, and it doesn't make users happy, and it's a customization hanging around for no reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then use existing proven patterns and guidance to support your work for the transformation. We have a lot of existing videos, a lot of existing guidance available. And even though some of them might have been recorded, let's say 2015 to 2014, they're absolutely still valid, especially when you're transforming from farm solutions to the adding model. Yes, some of that material doesn't mention SharePoint framework as an option, but that's absolutely a valid option in SharePoint Online as well. Understand supported configurations in SharePoint Online. This is a really important thing which we updated on the slide just before we started actually recording, because Erwin actually raised this. And this really comes down on the fact that in on-premises, you can configure your farm to have exceptions. In SharePoint Online, that's not possible. You cannot call to SharePoint Online support and say, yeah, for this list, I want to have an exception where I can store more than 5,000 items in this list, or whatever the alternate access mappings, or whatever the let's say, policy permissions. There's no exceptions. You really need to understand what are the options which you have and the configurations in SharePoint Online, and what are the configuration settings in Tenant Admin. It might be that the thing what you're assuming should be there might not be there, and there might be some additional settings as well.
And that's both from an end user perspective, which URL do they go to, etc. Those kind of things. That's important. But when you mention the lists, for instance, so if you have been changing the list throttling settings on premises to allow more than 5,000 items in a query, and that is not possible in the cloud, you will have to refactor your application. You will have to change your business logic of your solution to use multiple lists, or introduce folders in that list, or whatever technology you're going for, or solution you're going for to overcome that list throttling issue. But you have to, it's very important to understand what your I don't necessarily call it limitations, but what are the options and the configurations are in SharePoint Online, indeed.
Sure. And like mentioned on the previous slide, estimate based on functional requirements, not on a technical implementation. Technically, what we saw with many of the customers when we went through this process is that quite often the WSP packages don't mean a thing. They were not. We started out thinking a few years back when we started the transformation initiatives. We started always by looking into farm solutions, and quite fast we realized that, well, yeah, it does kind of give us some sort of a hunch what will be there, but it doesn't tell which of the farm solutions are actually being used. The fact that the farm solution is being activated on a farm doesn't mean that it's actually being used. And that's a really, really important thing. Understand what's being actually used and what are the functional requirements and business requirements behind those things. Then kind of 4, let's say, more technical recommendations, which are good to remember when you're looking into SharePoint Online. And this might be familiar for you, or this might be shocking for you as well if you haven't followed up on our SharePoint Online guidance. Like, do not use feature framework or web templates with your provisioning. Technically, declarative sandbox solutions are available, but feature framework has its flaws, and there's much better alternative ways of doing this stuff in SharePoint Online, which would be using the remote APIs, using, for example, the PnP provisioning engine or whatever remote provisioning engine to enable those required steps which you used to achieve using feature framework or a web template. And feature framework and web template usage, there's significant issues around these things. For example, save site as a template, and then suddenly the template doesn't work at all, and then it will cause you challenges. If you're using remote APIs, those issues won't be there. So you're reducing your future challenges with the right approach. Use SharePoint Framework for the UI experiences where possible. So for the UI elements or the web parts and extensions, please use SharePoint Framework. Absolutely future-proof and super capable platform for your customizations.
And it's good to highlight also
yes.
that the SharePoint Framework will come to SharePoint on-premises, SharePoint 2016.
Absolutely, yes, as part of the feature pack too. Really good reminder, because at that point you can do customizations once for on-prem and SharePoint Online. Now, do not use custom master pages if possible to future-proof your deployment. There are exceptions on this rule, and this is definitely, none of this is black and white. There is no such thing as best practices. It always depends on what are you trying to achieve. But if you can avoid a custom master page, it's much better. Why? Well, because the way we introduce capabilities in SharePoint Online is that we, for example, enhance the existing custom master out-of-the-box master pages. So if your site is using a custom master page, it's not getting any of the enhancements. Or it might not get, or it might get some of them, but not fully, and that might actually cause you challenges in the future.
So you can use them if you know what you're doing. Effectively, if
yes.
you're up to the challenge.
If you're up to the challenge, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And that's a good way of putting it, because that will, without no doubt, cost you additional costs in the future if you choose to use custom master pages. Now, absolutely valid approach, but sooner or later, you will need to make additional investments. And then the fourth one, take advantage of Azure capabilities for long-running tasks and for other stuff as well. So, or technically it could be whatever cloud provider, but obviously Azure is the most closest one to the SharePoint Online. And within Azure, you can easily use, for example, web jobs for, let's say, scheduled tasks, governance checking, governance of processes, Azure functions for faster operations, service bus to integrate against on-premises. And there's a lot of multiple different ways of doing this, and a lot of advanced scenarios which you can achieve using the Azure capabilities together with SharePoint Online. Good. A lot of talking. Like mentioned, we didn't want to do any demos, because doing demos on this topic would require that we're going to have a, let's say, 4-hour webcast.
I would dare to say a week.
Oh yes, yes,
easily.
There's so many kind of small snippets here and there. We have a lot of guidance available on this topic. Please have a look on that, and please use the community channel for asking additional insights if you can't find what's relevant for you. We're looking into investing on the transformation guidance in the future as well, and we should be updating the existing guidance to mention SharePoint Framework and all of that stuff as well. And I would also recommend one more time to have a look on the process and understand the recommendations around the readiness, the assessment, the planning, implementation, and deployment, because it has been proven a successful process for many other customers as well. But thank you, Erwin, for joining me on this discussion.
My pleasure.
And thank you for your insights and stories as well. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.